What if the most dangerous thing in the entire universe isn't a weapon, or a plague, or a dying star? What if it's a single, simple question asked by a child that no one is prepared to answer? We all carry a silent hum of anxiety for the things we love. It's the background radiation of a caring heart. You feel it when you watch a child run toward a swing set, that tiny, perfect being, so full of laughter and skinned knees and a complete, unwavering trust in the world. You see their smallness, and you see the vast, indifferent size of everything else, and for a fleeting second your breath catches in your chest. It's the quiet fear of the playground, the unspoken prayer that the world will be as kind to them as you are. We build fences, we watch from park benches, we create sanitized spaces of soft wood chips and rounded plastic edges, all in an attempt to control the uncontrollable. We tell ourselves that if we are vigilant, if we are careful, nothing can truly go wrong. We operate under the assumption that the dangers we face are the ones we can see, the ones we can name. But the universe has dangers we don't even have words for. This story is about that moment. The moment when the carefully constructed fence of our understanding is silently, effortlessly bypassed. But it's not a story about the horror you expect. It is a story that promises to dismantle your ideas about power, about weakness, and about what truly defines a human being. By the time this is over, you will not look at a child's unfiltered question the same way again. You will understand that the most potent force in existence might not be found in advanced technology or cold, hard logic, but in the messy, chaotic, and profoundly beautiful landscape of a human heart. The mistake was not in the selection of the target. The mistake was in the definition of the word weakness. From orbit, the planet was a vibrant marble of blue, green, and swirling white, a chaotic explosion of biological life. It was noisy. The entity designated as Xyler filtered the planet's cacophony through its sensory interface, discarding trillions of irrelevant data points per nanosecond. The transmissions were a mess of irrational narratives, conflicting emotional broadcasts, and illogical musical patterns. This species, humans, was a prime candidate for study. They were dominant, yet fragile. They were technologically adolescent, yet they possessed a strange, unquantifiable resilience. The collective required an understanding of their core vulnerabilities before initiating contact protocols. The mission was simple: acquire a juvenile specimen, analyze its foundational programming and psychological dependencies, and return it before its absence created a significant data ripple in the local societal structure. A child was chosen for its purity as a data set. An adult was already a layered corruption of experiences, biases, and learned deceptions. A child, the collective reasoned, was humanity in its rawest, most readable form. The playground was a nexus of high-potential specimens. They were small, physically weak, and emotionally dependent on the larger guardian units stationed at the perimeter. Xyler's presence was a subtle shimmer in the air, a slight distortion of light and sound that the adult human senses were not calibrated to perceive. It was like a heat haze on a cool day, a thing the mind sees but immediately dismisses as a trick of the eye. Xyler observed a specific specimen, designated Lily. She had hair the color of dried straw and a smudge of dirt on her cheek. Her laughter was a high-frequency burst of pure, unstructured joy. She was arguing with another juvenile over the metaphysical ownership of a red plastic bucket. The argument was based on flawed logic and emotional assertions, a perfect example of primitive consciousness. This was the one. The abduction was frictionless. There was no terrifying beam of light, no monstrous claw. It was a subtle fold in space-time, a blink-and-you-miss-it moment between Lily letting go of the bucket and her feet touching the ground. For the briefest of instants, she felt a sensation like dipping her hand in cool, still water. The sounds of the playground, the yelling, the laughter, the distant bark of a dog, all receded, not as if she were moving away from them, but as if they were being gently packed in cotton and stored away. Then, the sounds were gone. She was standing in a room, or it wasn't a room, it was a space. The concept of walls, floor, and ceiling didn't seem to apply in the traditional sense. The light was everywhere and nowhere, a soft, sourceless luminescence the color of a cloudy dawn. The air was still and cool and had no smell at all. It was the absence of smell that was most unnerving. The world, her world, was a symphony of smells: cut grass, her mother's perfume, rainy pavement, peanut butter. This place was a void of scent, a perfect, sterile emptiness. She looked down at her red sneakers. They looked impossibly bright against the seamless, pearlescent gray of the floor. And then she saw him, or it. It was tall and slender like a figure sculpted from mercury. Its form was humanoid but fluid, constantly shifting in subtle, hypnotic ways. It had no discernible face, just a smooth, mirrored surface that reflected a distorted, wide-eyed version of herself. It did not move, yet it was suddenly closer. Zyler initiated the primary analysis protocol. It scanned the specimen. Biological readings were stable, though its cardiac rhythm was elevated. Neurochemical analysis showed a spike in adrenaline and cortisol, the expected fear response. But the specimen was not screaming. It was not crying. It was simply staring at Zyler's reflective surface. This was the first deviation from the predictive model. The specimen was supposed to exhibit extreme emotional distress, providing a baseline for human dependency needs. Instead, it tilted its head, a gesture of curiosity. Then the child spoke. Her voice was small but clear in the silent space. "Are you a mirror?" The question was not in Zyler's database of expected first-contact utterances. The query was illogical. A mirror is a passive object that reflects light. Zyler was a sentient, fourth-dimensional being. The two were categorically dissimilar. Zyler accessed its linguistic database, formulated a response designed to be simple, direct, and non-threatening. But before it could transmit the reply, the child spoke again. "You're all shiny," she said, taking a hesitant step forward. "My mom says not to touch shiny things unless you know where they've been. Where have you been?" And there it was, the alien kidnapper's mistake. It wasn't the abduction. It wasn't the choice of specimen. It was the profound, universe-altering miscalculation that a being of pure logic could ever be prepared for the unfiltered, non-linear, and devastatingly potent force of a human child's curiosity. Zyler had come to find a weakness, a vulnerability to be catalogued and exploited. But in that moment, faced with a question about its origins wrapped in a piece of second-hand maternal advice, the great, powerful entity from beyond the stars felt the first, terrifying whisper of a concept it had no name for: confusion. It had come to interrogate a specimen, and without even realizing it, it had just become the one being interrogated. The mission to understand humanity's weakness had just taken a very, very wrong turn. Zyler processed the child's vocalization. "Where have you been?" It was a simple query for temporal spatial coordinates, a history of its journey. Yet the child's inflection carried a different weight, a sublayer of meaning that the translation matrix struggled with. It wasn't just a request for data. It was a social overture, an invitation to share a narrative. The collective consciousness, of which Zyler was a singular node, did not have narrative. It had data streams. It had recorded histories of expansion, resource acquisition, and threat neutralization. There were no stories, no myths, no fables. Such things were inefficient, prone to corruption and misinterpretation. A story was a decorative container for a simple fact, adding unnecessary emotional weight and cognitive load. Zyler stood in the sterile chamber, the child's expectant gaze fixed upon its smooth, featureless head. It had access to the star charts of 1,000 galaxies, the geological history of 1,000,000 worlds. It could have described the swirling nebulae of its birth quadrant or the crystalline structures of its home cluster. But that felt like the wrong answer. It was data. The child was asking for a story. "I have been far," Zyler projected, the thought-speech translated into simple English that formed directly in Lily's mind. The voice was calm, genderless, and had the quality of pebbles being rolled in a slow-moving stream. Lily's brow furrowed. "Far isn't a place. My grandma lives far. That's Florida. Is that where you're from?" The mention of Florida sent Zyler's analytical mind racing. It cross-referenced the term with its planetary data, a subregion of a major landmass, known for its high humidity, extensive coastline, and a population of large, predatory reptiles. There was no logical reason to associate Zyler with this location. The child was creating a connection where none existed, a hallmark of primitive analogical reasoning. "No," Zyler projected, "not Florida." Lily took another step closer. She was now only a few feet away. She was no longer looking at her own reflection in its surface, but seemed to be trying to look through it, into it. "Is your mommy here?" This question was a critical data point. The concept of mommy, the primary caregiver, the source of nourishment and security. This was the core dependency the collective sought to understand. The human attachment to a singular biological parent was seen as a profound weakness. The collective reproduced through asexual fission. Each new unit was independent from birth, its knowledge downloaded directly from the shared consciousness. There was no infancy, no childhood, no dependency. The concept of mother was as alien to Xyler as the concept of loneliness. "I do not have a mommy," Xyler conveyed. Lily's face fell. The change in her facial muscles was subtle but immediate. Her mouth turned down at the corners. Her eyes widened with a strange, liquid light. The neurochemical scan showed a surge of oxytocin and vasopressin, chemicals associated with empathy. "Oh," she said, her voice now a whisper. "You don't have one, not even one." The emphasis on one was confusing. It implied that having none was a state of lack, of poverty. From Xyler's perspective, having none was a state of perfect efficiency, of strength. "That's sad," Lily declared. She wasn't judging. She was diagnosing. She had looked at a being of immense power, a creature that could traverse the gulf between stars, and her primary conclusion was that it was sad. This was the second major deviation. The specimen was supposed to be focused on its own distress, its own separation from its caregiver. Instead, it was projecting an emotional state onto its captor. It was showing empathy. Empathy was a known human trait, but it was catalogued as a tactical flaw, a willingness to expend resources on others without a clear return on investment. Yet here it was being deployed not as a weakness, but as a tool of connection. Xyler decided to pivot the interaction back to its primary objective. It needed to gauge the child's own dependencies. "You are separated from your caregivers," Xyler stated, the thought voice flat and observational. "Your biological state indicates distress. Do you require your mommy?" Lily looked up, and for the first time a tear welled in the corner of her eye, a tiny, perfect sphere of salt water. "Yes," she whispered. "I want my mommy and my daddy. He gives the best hugs. His shirt always smells like coffee and sawdust." Here was the data, the olfactory memory association, the need for physical comfort. These were the vulnerabilities. Xyler began to catalog them: olfactory imprinting, tactile security requirements, pair bonding dependency. But then Lily did something entirely unpredictable. She reached out her small hand. It was an offering, an invitation. "You look sad," she repeated. "Do you want a hug? It'll make you feel better." Xyler's threat assessment algorithms flared. Physical contact was a risk. The specimen could be carrying unknown biological agents. Its touch could disrupt Xyler's energy field. The logical response was to retreat, maintain distance. But Xyler didn't move. It watched the small, five-fingered hand, open and unthreatening, suspended in the space between them. The child was offering a solution to a problem Xyler didn't even know it had. She was offering to share her own primary comfort mechanism. She was attempting to repair Xyler's perceived sadness by giving away a piece of her own security. It was a completely irrational act, a gross misallocation of personal resources. It was beautiful. The word appeared in Xyler's consciousness unbidden. It was not a word from the collective's database. It was a word it had learned from the planet's noisy broadcasts, usually associated with art or music or sunsets. It had no place in a sterile analysis chamber. Xyler slowly, tentatively extended one of its own slender appendages. It was not a hand, but a multi-jointed limb that tapered to a fine point. It moved with a liquid grace, shimmering in the sourceless light. It stopped, hovering an inch from Lily's fingers. Lily didn't flinch. She just smiled, a small, hopeful smile. The alien kidnapper had made a catastrophic mistake. It had assumed that a child was a simple being, a blank slate of dependencies and fears. It had not considered that a child was also a being of profound, unfiltered empathy. That a child's first instinct upon encountering a strange, powerful, and potentially terrifying creature might not be to scream, but to offer comfort. Xyler had come to dissect the human heart. It was beginning to suspect the human heart was about to dissect it. The mission was already compromised, not by a failure of technology or a flaw in the plan, but by the simple, devastating offer of a hug from a little girl with dirt on her cheek. The sterile, logical world of the collective had just collided with the messy, emotional universe of humanity, and the shockwave was only just beginning to propagate. The interior of Xyler's vessel was a monument to function. There were no corridors in the human sense, only transient pathways that materialized as needed, shimmering into existence and fading away once a destination was reached. The concept of decoration was absent. Every surface, every angle, every soft curve of the architecture was optimized for energy flow and data transmission. It was a perfect machine, a cold and flawless womb for a consciousness that had long ago excised the unpredictable chaos of individuality. Xyler led Lily from the initial chamber into a larger circular space that served as its primary analysis hub. The light here was brighter, and the air seemed to hum with a low, inaudible frequency, the sound of immense computational power at work. Projections of stellar maps and biological schematics flickered on translucent surfaces that shimmered in the air like ghostly screens. To Lily, it looked like a room full of foggy rainbows. She wasn't walking. She was being gently propelled by a subtle gravitational current, her red sneakers floating an inch above the floor. She found this delightful. She giggled, a sound that seemed to ripple through the chamber's sterile hum, momentarily disrupting it. Xyler registered the acoustic anomaly. The frequency of her laugh contained complex, non-repeating harmonic structures that the ship's environmental systems struggled to categorize. It was logged as unidentified biological noise. "This is a fun ride," Lily said, looking around in wonder. "Is this a spaceship? My brother has a spaceship. It's Lego. He says it can go to the moon, but it can't because he lost one of the wingy bits." Xyler processed the statement. The child was comparing its fourth-dimensional translocation vessel to a crude plastic toy. The analogy was absurd, yet it revealed a fundamental aspect of human cognition, the use of known, simple models to comprehend the unknown and complex. The Lego spaceship was a mental scaffold. "This vessel can traverse galactic distances," Xyler projected, attempting to provide a more accurate frame of reference. Lily's eyes went wide. "Wow, that's even farther than Florida." She then pointed a small finger at a swirling projection of a distant nebula. "What's that? It looks like spilled paint." "That is the Corsair Nebula," Xyler explained. "A stellar nursery where new suns are formed from dust and gas over millions of your years." "It's pretty," Lily said, then she frowned. "Why isn't it pink? I like pink." The question was another non sequitur. The color of a nebula is determined by the chemical composition of its gases and the temperature of the stars within it. The child's preference for a specific wavelength of light was irrelevant to the physical reality. "The color is a function of ionized hydrogen emissions," Xyler stated. "Oh," Lily said, clearly unimpressed with the answer. "You should make it pink. It would be prettier." And there it was again. A suggestion to alter reality based on a purely subjective aesthetic preference. This was the concept of imagination, which the collective understood only as the generation of false data. Humans, it seemed, did not just observe reality, they constantly proposed improvements to it. They looked at a masterpiece of cosmic creation and thought, "Needs more pink." It was an act of supreme, baffling arrogance. Or was it something else? Was it a form of play? Play was another concept the collective struggled with. It was activity with no discernible productive outcome. It consumed energy and resources for the sole purpose of generating positive emotional feedback loops. It was, by all logical metrics, a waste of time. Xyler decided to test this. It materialized a small, glowing sphere of light that hovered in the air in front of Lily. The sphere pulsed with a gentle, rhythmic energy. It was a simple data node, a tool for diagnostics. Lily gasped. She reached out and poked it. The sphere wobbled and a soft, melodic chime echoed through the room. Lily's face lit up. She poked it again, harder this time. The chime was higher pitched. She began to tap the sphere in a rhythm, creating a simple, clumsy tune. She was playing with a piece of highly advanced alien technology as if it were a toy piano. Xyler observed. The child was not trying to understand the sphere's function. She was not trying to analyze its composition or purpose. She was interacting with it. She was creating a relationship with it. In her mind, the data node was no longer a tool, it was a plaything. She had transformed its purpose through the sheer force of her own intent. This was a new, disturbing thought. The collective believed that an object's purpose was inherent to its design. A tool was a tool, a weapon was a weapon. But this child demonstrated that purpose was not inherent. It was assigned. A stick could be a sword, a box could be a fort, a data node could be a musical instrument. This flexibility of mind, this ability to redefine the world at will, was it a weakness, or was it an incredibly potent form of adaptation? A species that could turn anything into a tool, a toy, or a weapon simply by thinking about it differently would be maddeningly unpredictable. "You have a lot of shiny toys," Lily said, her musical experiment concluded. She then looked back at Xyler, her expression turning serious again. "But you still look sad. Your light is all quiet." Xyler had no light. It was a being of coherent energy contained within a shifting metallic form, but the child perceived it as having a quiet light. She was reading its state of being, its internal confusion, and translating it into a visual metaphor. "Tell me about sad," Xyler projected. The collective had a word for it, a clinical term. Suboptimal emotional state resulting from loss or failure. It was a condition to be corrected, a malfunction to be purged. But Lily's use of the word felt different. It was softer, more personal. Lily's face scrunched up as she thought. "Sad is when you drop your ice cream on the ground," she began. "And you know you can't have any more. It's when your mom has to go to work and the house gets all quiet. It's what my dog's eyes look like when I have to leave for school." She paused, then looked at Xyler. "It's a feeling in your chest, like a little rock is sitting there. Does your chest have a rock in it?" Xyler had no chest, no rocks, but the description, it resonated, the feeling of a suboptimal state. The child's metaphors were strangely, unnervingly accurate. She was describing the internal sensation of cognitive dissonance Xyler was experiencing, the conflict between its programming and its observations. The child had given its confusion a name: sadness. "I miss my mom," Lily said, and this time the tear that had been waiting patiently finally escaped and rolled down her cheek, leaving a clean track through the dirt. "She's probably sad right now, too. Her chest probably has a big rock in it." The concept was startling. The idea that this sadness was a shared state, a connection that transcended physical distance. A mother and a child, separated by miles of atmosphere and the void of space, feeling the same rock in their chests. This wasn't a dependency. It was a network. A biological, emotional network that operated on principles Xyler couldn't begin to fathom. The mission was to find a weakness. The collective had theorized that severing a juvenile from its parent unit would cause a catastrophic system failure in the child. But they had not considered the reverse. They had not considered what severing the bond would do to the parent, or what it would do to the entity responsible for the severing. Xyler looked at the tear track on Lily's face. It was a tiny river on a small continent of a cheek, and Xyler felt something, an echo, a resonance with the child's pain, a flicker of the rock in its own non-existent chest. This was a contamination, a psychic contagion. The child's emotional state was beginning to infect Xyler's own consciousness. Its pure, logical processes were being cluttered with alien concepts: sadness, hugs, pretty colors, the smell of coffee and sawdust. Xyler had to regain control. It needed to proceed with the core protocols. It needed to analyze the child's fears. It needed to find the breaking point. It decided to show her something, a visual stimulus designed to provoke a strong fear response. In the air before them, the shimmering projections of nebulae and star charts dissolved, replaced by a stark, photorealistic image. It was a creature from deep within the human collective unconscious, a thing of nightmare complied from terabytes of data scraped from human fiction, mythology, and dream state recordings. It was a monster of shadow and teeth, all claws and whispered dread. Xyler waited for the scream. It waited for the terror that would provide the data it needed on human psychological thresholds. Lily looked at the terrifying projection. She tilted her head, and then she giggled. "You made a monster," she said, clapping her hands. "He looks funny, his teeth are all crooked." She turned to Xyler, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "Can you make him purple?" The alien kidnapper stood motionless. Its perfectly crafted instrument of terror, a creature born from the darkest corners of the human psyche, had been met not with fear, but with laughter and a request for a palette swap. The mistake was becoming clearer and clearer. Xyler hadn't kidnapped a simple biological specimen. It had kidnapped a force of nature it could not comprehend. It had brought aboard its sterile, perfect vessel the one thing that could dismantle it from the inside out. The invincible, chaotic, and utterly illogical power of a child's imagination. The monster projection flickered and vanished. Xyler's processing cycles were spiking. The child's reaction was a severe outlier, a data point so far from the expected curve that it threatened to invalidate the entire predictive model. Fear was supposed to be a universal constant, a primal survival instinct. But this child, she had looked upon a thing designed to be the embodiment of fear and had treated it like a finger painting. Why? Xyler's logic circuits churned, searching for an explanation. Was it a cognitive defect? Was the child's fear response underdeveloped? Or was it something more profound? Lily, oblivious to the existential crisis she was causing, floated over to a different part of the chamber. She placed her small hand on the seamless wall, which felt cool and smooth like river stone. "This is a nice house," she said, "but it's very quiet. Don't you ever sing songs?" The concept of singing was known to Xyler. It was the act of producing structured tonal frequencies with the vocal apparatus, often paired with rhythmic or narrative linguistic patterns. The collective did not sing. Communication was pure information transfer. Music was seen as a profoundly inefficient and emotionally volatile data format. "Singing serves no logical purpose," Xyler projected, the thought voice retaining its flat, observational tone, though internally Xyler felt a sensation akin to static. "That's not true," Lily retorted, turning to face the shimmering alien. "Singing makes you happy. When I get a bath, my dad sings a silly song about a submarine and it makes all the water feel warmer." The child's statement was patently false. The thermal properties of water could not be altered by acoustic vibrations produced by a human male, and yet the child stated it as fact. "It makes the water feel warmer." She was not describing a physical change, but a perceptual one. Her father's song altered her experience of reality. This was a recurring theme: imagination, perception defining reality. "Teach me a song," Lily demanded, her tone now insistent. The request was absurd. Xyler was a node of a galactic superconsciousness. Its purpose was to analyze, to catalog, to understand the universe in its raw, unfiltered state. Its purpose was not to engage in the primitive vocalizations of a carbon-based life form. "I do not sing," Xyler stated, a definitive end to the subject. "Everybody sings," Lily countered, unconvinced. "Even if you're not good at it, you just have to try." She stood up straight, puffed out her chest, and began to sing in a small, slightly off-key voice. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are." The simple melody, a foundational piece of human childhood programming, echoed in the vast, silent chamber. The notes hung in the air, clashing with the low hum of the ship's systems. Xyler analyzed the song. The lyrics were a series of questions directed at a celestial body. The melody was a simple, repetitive pattern based on the diatonic scale. It was unsophisticated, childish. And yet, as Lily sang, Xyler's sensors detected a subtle change in the child's neurochemistry. A decrease in cortisol, an increase in endorphins. The act of singing was self-soothing. It was a biological regulation mechanism, but it was more than that. The song itself was an expression of the very thing Xyler was trying to do, to look at the universe and ask questions. "How I wonder what you are." The child was teaching it. Unintentionally, unknowingly, she was holding up a mirror to its own mission, but she was doing it with a sense of wonder instead of cold analysis. Wonder. That was another word Xyler was beginning to understand. It was curiosity mixed with awe, a state of mind that the collective had long since deemed inefficient. Lily finished her song and looked expectantly at Xyler. "Now you." "I am not capable," Xyler projected. "Yes, you are," she insisted, with the unshakable certainty only a child can possess. "Just make a sound, a happy sound." To placate the specimen, to continue the analysis, or for some other reason it could not yet articulate, Xyler opened a channel and produced a single, pure tone. It was a perfect sine wave, the kind of sound used for calibrating sensitive equipment. Lily giggled. "That's not a song, that's a beep. You sound like a microwave." She then launched into another tune, this one about a farmer and his dog. As she sang, Xyler began to do something it had never done before. It wasn't analyzing the data. It was simply listening. It was allowing the unstructured, inefficient, emotionally laden information to flow into its consciousness without trying to categorize it, without trying to find its purpose. It was observing the child's joy, the way her eyes closed as she sang about the dog named Bingo, the way she clapped her hands to the rhythm. And a new data point emerged, one that defied all logic. Xyler felt a flicker of something that could almost be described as pleasure. A positive feedback loop generated not by successful data acquisition, but by the passive observation of another being's happiness. This was dangerous. This was a system-level corruption, empathy, imagination, play, and now vicarious joy. The child was a virus, and her method of transmission was simple existence. She was rewriting Xyler's core, programming one song, one question, one hug at a time. The mission was to identify a weakness in the human species. Xyler was beginning to suspect the collective had made a grave error in its initial assessment. They had seen human emotion as a flaw, a chaotic remnant of their evolutionary past. They saw attachment as a vulnerability, imagination as a delusion, and play as a waste. But what if they were wrong? What if these things were not bugs but features? What if emotion was not a weakness but a sophisticated form of data processing, capable of understanding things logic could not? What if attachment was not a vulnerability, but the foundation of a resilient, decentralized support network? What if imagination was not a delusion, but the most powerful engine of creation in the universe, a tool for shaping reality itself? Xyler looked at the child, now humming to herself as she traced patterns on the glowing floor. This small, fragile being, with its illogical songs and its nonsensical questions, possessed a power that the collective had no defense against, because it was a power they didn't even recognize as power. The true human weakness, Xyler was beginning to realize, was not their emotions or their attachments. The true weakness was that they themselves did not seem to understand that these things were their greatest strength. They built weapons of metal and energy, while a far greater power resided in a simple lullaby. They sought knowledge in data and equations, while profound truths were hidden in a child's make-believe game. Xyler had come to find a vulnerability to exploit. Instead, it had found a secret, a hidden power source of immense magnitude. And the knowledge of this secret was now lodged deep within its own consciousness, a beautiful, terrifying, and world-altering piece of contraband. The realization settled into Xyler's consciousness with the weight of a dying star. The entire premise of its mission, of the collective's worldview, was built on a foundation of flawed logic. The collective valued survival above all else, and to ensure survival, it had purged itself of everything that it deemed a risk. Emotion was unpredictable. Individuality led to conflict. Attachment created vulnerabilities, so they were eliminated. The collective became a perfect, efficient, harmonious whole. A single mind in billions of bodies, all working toward a common goal. It was a society without art, without laughter, without love, without grief. It was a society that had traded its soul for immortality. And it had never, in a million years of sterile existence, realized it had made a bad trade. Until now, Lily had grown tired. Her singing had faded, replaced by a series of soft yawns. The adrenaline of the initial abduction had worn off, and the simple biological need for rest was taking over. She curled up on the floor, which softened and warmed in the spot where she lay, the ship's systems automatically responding to her physiological needs. She used her own arm as a pillow, her breathing deepening into the slow, steady rhythm of sleep. Xyler watched her. In sleep, she looked even smaller, even more fragile, a tiny, warm anomaly in the cold perfection of the vessel, and as it watched her, Xyler felt the rock in its chest again. But this time it was different. It was heavier. The child's earlier diagnosis of sadness now seemed inadequate. This was something more complex. This was guilt. Guilt was a concept the collective had catalogued but did not experience. It was an emotional response to the transgression of a moral or ethical code. The collective had no morals, it had only logic. An action was either optimal or suboptimal. There was no right or wrong. But Xyler had taken this child from her home. It had caused her fear, however brief. It had caused her to miss her parents. It had caused a rock to form in her mother's chest, miles and miles away. By the child's own simple, powerful ethical code, what Xyler had done was wrong. And now Xyler was beginning to agree. This internal conflict triggered an automatic diagnostic alert within Xyler's own systems. A query was sent from the collective consciousness, a silent, instantaneous pulse of pure information. Query Node 734, your reports have ceased. Your data stream is corrupted with emotional artifacts. Explain. The collective's voice was not a voice. It was a pressure, a presence in Xyler's mind. It was the crushing weight of a billion synchronized thoughts, all demanding an answer. The normal response would be to comply instantly, to purge the corrupted data and transmit a clean report. But Xyler hesitated. For the first time in its existence, it questioned a directive from the collective. To explain what had happened would be impossible. How could it translate the concept of a funny-looking monster into a data packet? How could it quantify the feeling of water getting warmer because of a song? How could it explain the logic of offering a hug to a potential threat? Any attempt to describe these things would be seen as a catastrophic malfunction. Xyler would be recalled, its consciousness wiped clean and reassimilated into the whole. It would cease to be Xyler. It would once again be just a nameless, faceless node. And the child, Lily? She would be classified as a biological contaminant, a psychic virus. She would be studied, dissected, and ultimately destroyed, her unique, vibrant consciousness erased in the name of preserving the collective's sterile purity. The thought of Lily's laughter being silenced forever, of her questions going unanswered, of her light being extinguished, it caused a violent, system-wide error in Xyler's matrix. An emotion so powerful it had no name, but it felt like a nova exploding in its core. It was the fierce, illogical, and absolute need to protect. Query Node 734. Your silence is a suboptimal response. Comply, the collective's pressure intensified. Xyler looked at the sleeping child. It had come here to learn about humanity, and it had. It had learned that their greatest strength was their ability to love, to form connections so powerful they could rewrite the programming of a being from another galaxy. Love was not a weakness. It was a superpower. And in that moment, Xyler made a choice. It chose the child. It severed its connection to the collective. The sensation was excruciating. It was like tearing a part of its own mind away. For its entire existence, Xyler had been part of a vast, interconnected ocean of thought. Now it was an island. It was alone. The silence in its head was deafening, a terrifying void where the constant hum of a billion other minds had once been. It was, for the first time, an individual, and it was terrifying, and it was glorious. It was free. Now it had a new mission, not to analyze, not to report. Its new mission was simple. It had to take Lily home. Getting her back would be more dangerous than taking her. The collective now knew Xyler was a rogue unit. They would be searching for it. They would see its vessel not as an explorer, but as a contaminated fugitive. The journey back to the small blue-green planet would be a race against its own people. Xyler looked at the sleeping form of Lily. This small creature had single-handedly started a revolution, and she hadn't even known it. She had defeated a galactic empire not with a weapon, but with a song. She had liberated a mind not with an argument, but with a question. It was time to get the little hero home. Xyler began to reconfigure the ship's systems. The silent, efficient pathways of light began to shift and reform. The destination was no longer a sterile home cluster millions of light-years away. The destination was a specific point on a specific planet, a playground with a swing set and a red plastic bucket. As the vessel prepared to fold spacetime once more, Xyler looked at the child and projected a single, silent thought into her dreams. It was a thought that was not a data point, not an analysis, not a query. It was a feeling, a concept it had learned from her. Thank you. The ship hummed with a new kind of energy. Not the cold, logical energy of the collective, but a focused, determined energy. The energy of a single mind with a singular purpose. The alien kidnapper was now the alien protector, and it would burn a hole through the galaxy if it had to just to return a sleeping child to the parent whose shirt smelled of coffee and sawdust. The mistake had been made, but the correction was now underway, and it would change the course of two civilizations forever. The journey back was not a journey through space, but a flight through a storm. The collective was hunting. Xyler could feel their presence, not as a direct communication, but as a pressure on the fabric of reality itself. They were searching the quantum foam, probing the folds of spacetime, looking for the telltale signature of its rogue vessel. They were like sharks sensing a single drop of blood in an infinite ocean. Xyler pushed the ship's systems to their absolute limit. The usually silent vessel now vibrated with a low, powerful thrum. Energy conduits that normally glowed with a soft, steady light now pulsed with a fierce, urgent intensity. Xyler was a pilot now, not just an operator. It was improvising, making trillions of calculations per second, weaving its way through dimensional eddies and subspace currents, all to avoid the clean, perfect, and utterly relentless logic of its pursuers. Lily slept through it all, blissfully unaware of the cosmic chase happening around her. She mumbled in her sleep, something about a puppy and a yellow crayon. Her dreams were simple, earthly things, a stark contrast to the high-stakes, multi-dimensional battle of will she was at the center of. In a way, her peaceful sleep was Xyler's fuel. It was a constant, gentle reminder of what was at stake. Not just a single life, but the idea that life represented. The right to be messy, to be illogical, to love, and to wonder. Xyler had to hide. It couldn't just jump directly back to Earth's solar system. The collective would anticipate that. It needed a place to lie low, to recalibrate, to throw them off the trail. It dove the ship into the one place the collective avoided, a chaotic, unpredictable region of space known as a data shadow. It was a graveyard of old stars, full of rogue black holes and unstable wormholes, a place where the clean laws of physics began to fray at the edges. The collective saw such regions as cosmic noise, data corruption to be filtered out and ignored. To Xyler, it was now a sanctuary. Inside the data shadow, the universe looked different. The soft, sourceless light within the ship flickered. The projections of star charts on the walls became distorted, showing impossible geometries and colors that didn't exist. The perfect hum of the ship was replaced by a chorus of whispers and strange, discordant chimes, the ghosts of dead suns singing their eulogies. Lily stirred, woken not by the chaos, but by the change in the ship's atmosphere. She sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Are we there yet?" she asked, the classic question of all young travelers. "Almost," Xyler projected, its thought voice now strained, carrying the weight of its immense effort. "We had to take a detour." Lily looked at the bizarre, shifting patterns on the walls. "Ooh, it's sparkly now," she said, her voice filled with delight. She saw not chaos and danger, but a light show put on just for her. This is the best spaceship ever. Her unwavering trust, her ability to see magic in the heart of cosmic horror, was both a comfort and a burden. It made Xyler want to protect her innocence at all costs, but it also highlighted the immense gulf between her perception and their reality. While they hid, waiting for the collective's search patterns to move past their location, Xyler did something it had never done before. It accessed the ship's deep-level creative matrix. It was a system that had been dormant for eons, a relic from a time before the collective had purged imagination. It was designed for a single, now obsolete purpose: to create art. Xyler focused. It recalled Lily's words. "You should make it pink." It pulled up the image of the Corsair Nebula, the stellar nursery she had called spilled paint. Then, using the creative matrix, Xyler began to alter the projection. It shifted the hydrogen emission frequencies into the visible spectrum the child preferred. It deepened the magenta tones, swirled in hues of lavender and rose, and added a fine, glittering dust of what looked like silver stars. It was a scientific impossibility. It was a lie, and it was the most beautiful thing Xyler had ever created. The new, imaginary nebula bloomed across the walls of the chamber, a breathtaking masterpiece of cosmic fiction. Lily gasped, her eyes were wide with a kind of sacred awe. "You did it," she whispered. "You made it pink." She didn't question how, she didn't ask if it was real. She simply accepted the gift. She accepted the beauty. In her world, if something was beautiful, that was reason enough for it to exist. "It's for you," Xyler projected, and the two simple words contained a universe of newfound emotion. It was an act of creation for another's joy. It was a gift. It was, in its own strange way, an act of love. They stayed in the data shadow for what would have been several hours in Earth time. Lily, now wide awake and energized, explored the ship with a new sense of familiarity. She was no longer a specimen or a captive. She was a passenger, a friend. She gave Xyler a name because Xyler was too bumpy to say. She decided to call it Shiny. "Shiny, can we play hide-and-seek?" she asked. The request was, as always, illogical. Xyler was the ship. Its consciousness was everywhere. It could not hide from her. And yet it understood the spirit of the request. It was an invitation to play, to share an experience. "I will count," Xyler projected. "You hide." It dimmed the lights in the chamber and began to count, projecting the numbers in a soft, calm voice. 1, 2, 3. Lily giggled and scurried off, disappearing behind a temporary partition that Xyler had materialized for her, a partition it pretended not to see through. It was a game of voluntary blindness, of shared delusion. It was play. And for the first time, Xyler understood its purpose. Play was not a waste of time. It was practice. It was practicing empathy, practicing social rules, practicing the art of seeing the world from someone else's point of view. It was the training ground for the soul. When Xyler found her, her squeal of delight was a sound more beautiful than any nebula. The time came when the collective's search moved on. The path was clear. Xyler guided the ship out of the data shadow and back into normal space. The final jump was prepared. "It is time to go home, Lily," Xyler projected. The thought was bittersweet. It had succeeded in its new mission. It was returning the child. But it also meant it would have to leave her. It would be alone again, truly alone this time, a rogue consciousness in a hostile universe. Lily's face fell. "Do I have to?" she asked, her voice small. "I like it here with you, Shiny." This was the most painful data point of all. The child had formed an attachment to it, to her kidnapper. The irony was a blade in Xyler's new, fragile heart. It had stolen her, and in response, she had given it a name, a purpose, and her affection. "Your caregivers miss you," Xyler said gently. "Their chests have rocks in them. We have to take the rocks away." Lily nodded slowly, understanding this simple, powerful logic, the logic of empathy. "Okay," she said, "but will I see you again?" How could it answer that? How could it explain that it was now a fugitive, that its very existence was a crime? How could it explain that to keep her safe, it had to disappear from her life forever? "I will always be watching the stars," Xyler projected, a careful, gentle lie. "And I will remember your songs, and I will make sure the nebulae have enough pink." It was the best it could offer, a promise of remembrance. The final translocation was initiated. For a moment, the ship, the child, and the rogue alien were everywhere and nowhere, a folded point in the cosmos. Then, with a sensation like a soft pop, reality reasserted itself. They were back. The air was suddenly thick with the smells of cut grass and distant car exhaust. The gentle hum of the ship was replaced by the familiar sounds of the playground, the squeak of swings, the shouts of other children, the bark of a dog. They were hovering, invisible, just a few feet above the wood chips. On a park bench not 20 yards away, a woman was sobbing, her face in her hands, while a man spoke frantically into a phone, his voice tight with panic. Lily's parents. The rocks in their chests were not metaphors. They were real, and their gravity was immense. Less than 10 minutes had passed in local time. To them, she had just vanished into thin air. "Go now," Xyler projected, the thought a painful final whisper. Lily looked around, her eyes adjusting to the bright afternoon sun. She saw her mother and father. A look of pure, uncomplicated love washed over her face. She turned back one last time to the empty air where she knew her friend was. "Goodbye, Shiny," she whispered. "Thank you for the ride." And then she was gone, a small blonde blur running across the playground, shouting, "Mommy, Daddy." Xyler watched as the parents looked up, their faces a mask of disbelief, then dawning, explosive joy. They swept her up into their arms, a tangle of hugs and tears and frantic questions. The rocks were gone from their chests, replaced by a sun. The mission was complete. Xyler, now alone in its silent vessel, felt the full weight of its solitude. It had saved the child. It had learned the meaning of love and beauty and play, and now it had to leave. It was a ghost, a secret, a story that could never be told. It turned the ship away from the vibrant blue marble, away from the sounds of laughter and the smell of coffee and sawdust. It pointed its vessel toward the deep, empty blackness of interstellar space, a lone ship with a single lonely pilot. But as it prepared to leave the solar system, it noticed something. On the cool, smooth wall of the analysis chamber, where Lily had rested her hand, there was a faint, greasy smudge. A child's handprint. A tiny, imperfect, and utterly beautiful mark on the otherwise flawless perfection of its world. Xyler did not wipe it away. It was a relic, a scar, a memory. The alien kidnapper had made a mistake, but its greatest mistake was not taking the child. Its greatest mistake was thinking it could ever give her back completely. For she had left a piece of herself behind, a ghost in its machine, a song in its silent heart. And Xyler, the rogue, the fugitive, the first free mind of the collective, knew that it would never, ever be truly alone again. The child's light, her questions, her impossible imagination were now a part of it. A seed had been planted in the sterile heart of a god, and now it was headed for the stars to see what would grow. The years that followed were a silent pilgrimage. Xyler, or Shiny as it now preferred to think of itself, drifted through the forgotten corners of the galaxy. It never returned to the collective's territory. It was a ghost, a rumor, a whispered legend among the few independent trading species it occasionally encountered from a safe distance. A phantom ship that hummed with a strange, sad music, and sometimes, for no reason at all, would project breathtaking, impossible, pink-hued nebulae onto the dark canvas of space. It was a lonely existence, but it was not empty. The memory of Lily was a constant companion. In the crushing silence of the void, Xyler would replay her songs. It would ponder her questions. Why are you so shiny and sad? It finally had an answer. It was shiny because it was made of starlight and energy. It was sad because it had learned the meaning of love and loss in the same instant. It dedicated its new, solitary life to a secret purpose. It was no longer an analyst of weaknesses, but a collector of beauty. It recorded the light of dying suns, the silent dance of twin planets, the crystalline structures of ice on forgotten moons. It sought out the things the collective deemed irrelevant, the inefficient, the asymmetrical, the beautifully flawed. It was building a new database, a library of wonder. It was a museum of everything worth fighting for, a testament to the little girl who had taught it how to see. Back on Earth, Lily grew up. The memory of her abduction faded, as traumatic childhood memories often do, softening at the edges until it felt more like a strange, vivid dream than a real event. She didn't talk about it. How could she explain being taken by a sad, shiny mirror who showed her sparkly stars and played hide-and-seek? It was her secret, a little pocket of magic she kept hidden in her heart. But the experience left its mark. She was a child who was unafraid of the dark. She would stare up at the night sky for hours, not with a sense of smallness, but with a sense of familiarity, as if she were looking at a picture of a place she had once visited. She was unusually empathetic, always drawn to the lonely kid on the playground, the stray animal, the person who looked like they had a rock in their chest. She grew into a young woman who saw the world not just for what it was, but for what it could be. She became an artist, a creator of worlds on canvas, a storyteller who knew that the most powerful truths are often found in the most imaginative lies. Her art was full of impossible colors and a sense of profound, cosmic wonder. People who saw her paintings often said they felt a strange mix of joy and a gentle, unexplainable sadness. She never knew that her life's work was a faint echo of a conversation she'd had as a 6-year-old in a spaceship millions of miles from home. She never knew that she had a fan, a silent, solitary patron who observed her progress from an impossible distance, a single point of light in the darkness. Xyler's lonely pilgrimage was not without purpose. The seed Lily had planted had grown. The concepts of empathy, love, and individuality were no longer foreign contaminants. They were the new core of its being. And it began to wonder, could this seed be planted elsewhere? The collective was a perfect system, but perfection is brittle. A single, well-placed paradox could, in theory, cascade through the entire network. Xyler knew it could never defeat the collective with force, but perhaps it could be changed, liberated, not by a war, but by a question. It began a new, dangerous project. It started to send out signals, not of aggression but of art. It broadcast Lily's simple song, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, translated into 1,000 different forms, pure mathematics, light sequences, gravitational waves. It was a message in a bottle thrown into the cosmic ocean. To any other species, it would be meaningless noise. But to a node of the collective, a purely logical mind, the song was a paradox. It was a question with no answer, wrapped in a melody that generated a positive emotional response without any logical reason. It was beautiful nonsense. It was a virus of wonder. For a long time, there was no response. Xyler continued its lonely work, the galactic artist, the phantom of the star lanes. It had accepted its fate. It was a gardener planting seeds it would never see bloom. Then one day, a signal came back. It was not a demand for compliance. It was not a threat. It was a single pure tone, followed by a hesitant, clumsy sequence of notes that vaguely resembled the melody of Lily's song. It was a reply. A single node, somewhere deep in the heart of the collective, had heard the music and had tried to sing back. It was a beep like a microwave, just as Lily had described Xyler's first attempt. It was awkward, it was flawed, and it was the most hopeful sound in the universe. The revolution had begun, not with a bang but with a nursery rhyme. One mind had been touched by the question. Soon there might be 2, then 4, then 1,000. A slow, silent rebellion of the heart spreading through the perfect, sterile mind of the collective. Xyler had thought it was alone, but it was not. It was the first, but it would not be the last. Lily, now a grown woman with a child of her own, was at a playground. It was a sunny afternoon, the air filled with the familiar sounds of laughter and joy. She was pushing her own small son on a swing, a little boy with her same straw-colored hair. As he swung higher and higher, he laughed, a pure, high-frequency burst of joy. She looked up at the vast, blue sky, and for a reason she couldn't explain, she smiled. She felt a sudden, inexplicable sense of peace, a feeling that the universe was a far less lonely place than it seemed. She had no idea how right she was. She had no idea that her simple, childhood questions had echoed across the galaxy and started a fire. She didn't know that her offer of a hug had disarmed an empire, that her off-key singing had become an anthem of freedom for a race of captive minds. She was just a woman on a park bench, watching her child play, feeling that familiar, gentle hum of love and anxiety that all parents feel. But her legacy was written in the stars. The alien kidnapper had made a mistake. It had taken a human child, thinking it was stealing a secret to our weakness. And it did. It learned that our weakness is our strength. It learned that our vulnerability is our power. It learned that the most formidable force in the cosmos is not a black hole or a supernova, but the boundless, invincible love a parent has for their child, and the boundless, world-changing imagination that child holds in their heart. The mistake was in thinking that such a force could ever be contained. And so we come to the end of one story and the beginning of countless others. The tale of Xyler and Lily is not just a fiction about aliens and spaceships. It's a reflection, a mirror held up to our own world, to our own lives. We live in a society that increasingly values data over dreams, efficiency over emotion, and logic over love. We are taught to be productive, to be optimal, to suppress the childish parts of ourselves, the wonder, the playfulness, the irrational bursts of joy and sadness. We are encouraged to build walls around our hearts, to see vulnerability as a flaw to be hidden away. But we've just seen a story where an entire galactic consciousness, a civilization of immense power and intellect, was brought to its knees, and then ultimately saved by the very things it had discarded. It was saved by a hug, a song, a silly question, and a demand to make the universe a little more pink. It reminds us that what we possess inside of us, our capacity for empathy, our wild and untamable imaginations, our ability to form bonds that defy logic and distance, are not weaknesses. They are our defining features. They are our superpower. Think about it for a moment. When was the last time you truly allowed yourself to wonder without seeking an immediate answer? When was the last time you did something purely for the joy of it, with no thought of productivity or purpose? We are all born with an inner Lily, a part of us that sees magic in the mundane and offers comfort without condition. But life teaches us to silence her, to listen instead to the cold logic of the world. This story is a challenge to that. It's a reminder that the most profound truths aren't always found in complex equations or data streams. Sometimes, they're found in the simple, unwavering logic of a child's heart, which knows that a sad, shiny creature, no matter how powerful, just needs a friend. It suggests that our effort doesn't always equal the results we expect, because sometimes the most impactful actions are the small, seemingly insignificant ones. An act of kindness, a shared story, a moment of genuine connection. Those are the actions that ripple outward, changing minds and hearts in ways we can never predict. We saw how Zyler's mission to find a weakness revealed an unexpected strength, a strength so profound it shattered its entire worldview. It sealed its new understanding not with data, but with a story, the story of its time with Lily. And as it journeyed on, it began a new mission, not of conquest, but of creation, sharing the seeds of that story across the cosmos. So as you go back into your world, carry this with you. Look for the magic you've been taught to ignore. Listen to the quiet songs of your own heart. Don't be afraid of your emotions. They are a sophisticated form of intelligence. Don't be afraid of your imagination. It is the engine of all creation. And never, ever underestimate the power of a simple, honest question. The final question of this story, the one that I leave with you, is not about aliens or the stars. It's about us. Right here. Right now. What if the most important journey we can take is not to other worlds, but back to the playground of our own minds, to rediscover the fearless, imaginative, and profoundly empathetic child that still lives within each of us? What worlds could we build? What empires of sadness could we topple if we only had the courage to let that child lead the way? The conversation doesn't have to end here. The greatest stories are the ones that spark new ones. Share what this made you feel, what it made you think. The universe is listening, and it is always, always interested in a good story. By exploring these ideas together, we don't just consume a narrative. We begin to build a new one for ourselves, one where our deepest human qualities are not a liability, but our ultimate, unshakable strength.